an emotional and unflinching look at truth, power, and betrayal. Part 1. The Land That Bled in Silence. In the hills of Rwanda, where green fields once kissed the sky and children ran barefoot through banana groves, a nightmare took root. April 1994, 100 days of darkness, nearly 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus butchered with machetes, clubs, and homemade grenades. Neighbors turned into executioners, friends became hunters, mothers were raped in front of their children. Priests locked people in churches and set them ablaze. The world turned its cameras away. The official story of this genocide has long been centered around Hutu extremists in power, the Interahamwe militias, the Presidential Guard, and the genocidal broadcasts from Radio Television Libre de Mille Collines. But beneath this harrowing tale lies a deeper, more uncomfortable truth. A truth soaked in betrayal, power, and silence. And at the center of that tangled web stands Paul Kagame, the current president of Rwanda. Part 2, Before the Slaughter. Paul Kagame was not in Rwanda in 1990. He was living in Uganda, where he had grown up a refugee after the 1959 Hutu revolution forced his Tutsi family to flee. A disciplined man trained in military strategy, Kagame rose through the ranks of the Ugandan army, eventually becoming the head of military intelligence under Yoweri Museveni. But Kagame had never forgotten Rwanda. In 1990, he and other Tutsi exiles formed the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF. Under the banner of reclaiming their homeland and ensuring the safety of Tutsis, they launched an invasion from Uganda into Rwanda. What followed was a 3-year civil war. The RPF's justification was noble, but its methods were not. Villages were razed, civilians were executed, fields were poisoned with landmines. Human rights groups quietly documented the atrocities, but in the shadow of the larger ethnic conflict, the world paid little attention. The war was never about peace. It was about power, and Kagame was watching, calculating. Part 3. The Plane That Fell from the Sky. On the evening of April 6, 1994, a surface-to-air missile struck the plane carrying President Juvenal Habyarimana and President Cyprien Taryamira of Burundi. Both were killed. It was the spark that lit the fire. Within hours, the genocide began. Who fired that missile? The Hutu government accused the RPF. The RPF blamed Hutu extremists who wanted to derail peace talks. But years later, testimony emerged. Former RPF insiders, including Kagame's own bodyguards and ex-commanders, alleged that Kagame had ordered the assassination himself. According to these whistleblowers, Kagame viewed Habyarimana as the final obstacle to his seizure of power. The Arusha Accords, which promised power sharing in elections, didn't align with his vision of control. If true, Kagame gambled with a nation's soul to achieve his ambition. And weren't for during the genocide. As blood filled the streets of Kigali and cries echoed through the countryside, the RPF advanced. Kagame's forces pushed south from the north, battling both the Hutu army and genocidaires. To the world, Kagame was the savior, stopping a genocide that the West failed to prevent. But survivors in villages like Byumba, Gitarama, and Kibeho tell a more complex story. They speak of massacres committed by RPF soldiers, Hutu civilians executed under suspicion, entire communities disappeared. According to UN documents and declassified intelligence, Kagame's troops killed tens of thousands of civilians, even during the genocide. Yet he was never stopped. Why? Because the world needed a hero. And Paul Kagame, stoic, articulate, and fierce, fit that role perfectly. While the UN pulled out peacekeepers and Clinton apologized for doing nothing, Kagame claimed the moral high ground, and the corpses he left in his own advance were buried beneath that halo. Part 5. After the Slaughter. When the genocide ended in July 1994, Rwanda was a graveyard. Kagame became vice president and de facto ruler. Later, he officially took the presidency. He rebuilt the country with iron hands and Western aid. Skyscrapers rose in Kigali, roads were paved, women took leadership roles, schools reopened. Rwanda became the darling of Western donors, praised for economic growth, cleanliness, and security. But beneath this clean surface, Kagame silenced dissent with brutality. Opponents vanished. Journalists were jailed or found dead. Former allies who questioned his past, assassinated in South Africa, strangled in Nairobi, poisoned in Belgium. Refugees returning from Congo reported mass killings by RPF in refugee camps. In 2010, a UN report leaked evidence of possible genocide committed by Kagame's forces in Congo, targeting Hutu civilians. Kagame called the report absurd. Western leaders looked away again. Part 6, The Tears of a Nation. Ask the mothers who lost children to machetes if they feel justice was done. Ask the Hutu woman in Goma who watched her village burn under RPF shelling if Rwanda was liberated. Ask the Tutsi survivor in Kigali who now lives in fear for speaking about Kagame's dark past if peace has truly come. The tragedy of Rwanda is not just the genocide. It is how the truth was manipulated to serve power, how Kagame's crimes were hidden beneath the glow of development, how international guilt allowed a dictator to rule unchallenged. Paul Kagame, once seen as a liberator, has become the gatekeeper of a history written in fear and denial. Part 7. Who is to blame? The Hutu extremists who wielded machetes? Absolutely. The international community that turned a blind eye? Certainly. But Paul Kagame? If the allegations are true, and mounting testimonies and reports suggest they are, then Kagame was not just a man who ended a genocide. He was a man who may have helped ignite it, manipulated its narrative, and used its ashes to forge a throne. And that should make the world weep. Because in seeking justice, Rwanda was handed a new master, and in burying the truth, it buried part of its soul. History isn't only written by the victors. It's often silenced by them too. But in the voices of survivors, in the whispers of the dead, and in the courage of those who still ask questions, we hear the cries for accountability. Not for vengeance, not for hate, but for truth.